comic book experience is probably a lot different than other people's.
Yeah, so I actually started many years ago as a development executive, and I was fortunate enough to be able to make the transition to screenwriting, and spent many years working as a screenwriter, and was fortunate enough to make another career transition where I ended up opening up a screenwriting school in New York City. And we also now do online classes. So we actually have students all over the world, ranging from famous people. Actually, one of the Avengers is a student, and, all the way down to brand new writers who are picking up the pen literally for the first time. And what we do, screenwriting, comic book writing, it's all about voice, right? It's all about, we're in an empathy game, right? Where our job is to be able to step into somebody who is different from us and step into their shoes and imagine what it would be like to see the world through their eyes. And then by doing so to help take an audience on a journey that allows them to do the same thing, and that widens their horizons and lets them believe in something and lets them question and lets them wrestle with what does it mean? What is this crazy thing that we're all in together as human beings? So what we do, we're basically like the opposite of grad school. I have a real problem with the grad schools, in that I just think it's incredibly hard to be an artist if you have $300,000 of debt. And I also just think that the model is backwards, in that you get 2 years, maybe 3 years of total bliss where all you do is create, and then you graduate and you have nothing. You have no support, you have no mentorship, you have no teachers, and you have this crushing debt, and it's really hard. And the truth is, when you're starting your career, that's when you really need help,
Right.
when you're actually breaking in. And so we started in the screenwriting side, because that's what I did. And we were fortunate enough to add, an Emmy award-winning showrunner, a Pulitzer Prize. Now, actually, we have 2 Pulitzer Prize nominees now. So we have a really incredible staff. And what we do is we do super affordable classes. And for people who can't afford our super affordable classes, we do scholarships that can cover half the cost of tuition. And if you can't afford that, we have free events every Thursday night. We call them Quarantinis, and we bring a brilliant writer on and give people a chance to learn something about screenwriting, comic book writing, novel writing, playwriting, TV writing for free.
Okay.
And so, and then for the people who are really serious, what we do is we pair them one-on-one with a professional like Ron, and that person will read every page they write and mentor them through every stage of the writing process. And I've wanted to add comic books and screenwriting back when I was coming up were completely different worlds, but now they are so interconnected. And so we've been wanting to add a comic book writing class for a long time. And we're just very, very fortunate. One of our students met Ron at a Comic-Con and came to us and said, "You've got to hire this guy." and I met Ron, and I spent a good hour, maybe hour and a half on the phone talking to him, and I completely understood why.
So, what is your history with comic books? Being that they're not, you're not really, they're not really your thing. You're a screenwriter.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that they're not my thing. I would say that I'm not an expert.
Okay.
There are, a lot of people grew up reading comics. I actually did not. I grew up reading Louis L'Amour, and Piers Anthony and J.R.R. Tolkien, and it was only later. I was living in Venice Beach in my early screenwriting days, and my next door neighbor was Joshua Dysart, and Josh and I became incredibly close friends. And and he was really the person who introduced me to comics and introduced me to the art form and how it worked. And what was really interesting, I think a lot of lay people have a misperception of comics, and that we imagine, I think a lot of people imagine comics as being like, very primary colors kind of medium. And what was really interesting working with Josh, seeing Josh's work and talking comics with Josh was understanding that there are groundbreaking things you can do in a comic book, and that they are, yes, there's escapism in comics, and that's wonderful, just like there's escapism in my field, and that's wonderful. But underneath that escapism, that we can wrestle with political dilemmas. We can wrestle with, what does it mean to be a human being in the world, and what does it mean to be a hero? And I think that's a really powerful medium for that.
So do you remember the first comic that he gave you or introduced you to the medium with?
So I read, the first comic I ever read was his comic book, Violent Messiahs. And that was his first comic, his first published comic. Mm-hmm. And so that was actually my introduction to the medium. But I think that the piece that he did that actually touched me the most is something he just did recently. There was a homeless man who lived behind our house in our apartment building in Venice Beach. And his name was Eddie. He was always in full black leather. So he had like a black leather pants and a black leather vest and a black leather hat. And he, had a scraggly beard and no one has ever looked more homeless than Eddie. But we all became friends with Eddie. And Eddie, became a part of our community and a part of our lives. And he was not well. He had some mental health problems. He had severe alcoholism. His hands would shake every morning until he had his second beer. And never I was in Venice Beach for 8 years. There was one time Eddie asked me for money and I gave it to him. But he would never beg. He was just a nice man. And Eddie had all kinds of crazy adventures. And one of the craziest things that happened was a girl was kidnapped, and the police go around asking, and they ask the homeless people when something like that happens. And they asked Eddie, and he didn't know where she was. And he went out, and I don't know how Eddie found her, but Eddie found her. Eddie found her and returned her to her family. And I don't know how the hell he did it. Yeah. But Josh has this wonderful piece that's about Eddie, and it's about this homeless private eye. And it's a beautiful, complicated piece, and the whole thing is told in a drunken fugue where he can't quite tell what's real and what's not. And what's incredible about the piece, to me, is that every single thing in there is real. I know it because I lived it with John. Like all these adventures, there's one element that kind of holds it all together. That's a murder that's not real. But right. All the other elements of that piece are all crazy adventures that Eddie had when we were all living in Venice Beach together. And again, this is like, to me, this is the power of the medium. It's like actually looking inside somebody and saying, the power of that visual, you can write, you can create what it looks like inside of a person's mind. Mm-hmm. And I thought, so for me, that is, Josh has written a lot of beautiful things, but that's the pinnacle for me, because it spoke to me in such a personal and emotional way.
So let's talk a little bit about the class with Ron now. You said that one of your students suggested that you talked to Ron. So what is the class that Ron is doing? What's he covering and all that?
Sure. So, we're really particular on who we hire to teach. Teaching is it is such an important profession, and there are a lot of people who are great artists, great writers, who are not great teachers. And then there are a lot of people who are great teachers but don't necessarily know what they're teaching because they've never done it. And so, when you hire a teacher, you're looking for somebody who, first off, is a total expert in the field. You want somebody who is at the very, very top of their game, and has done it a million times and has made every mistake already, so that their students don't end up having to make the same mistakes. And then you're looking for someone who has a genuine love and care for their students, who's not going to impose their own ideas, who's instead going to bring out the voice and the artistry and the vision of the people they're working with. And so that was what attracted me to Ron. And thank you. I appreciate your show. We did a wonderful podcast. You should definitely check it out. If you go to writeyourscreenplay.com/podcast, you'll see that we did a wonderful interview with Ron Marz. And Ron really talks about, how a comic book is constructed. How do you think about comics? How do you learn to think in panels? And what are both the limitations? Like, how do you know if your project is a comic book? What are the limitations of the field? And also, how do you, what are the things that the field that this form of art can do that other forms simply cannot? And so we had a really wonderful discussion about that, with me kind of talking about film and television, and Ron talking about comics and how those two intersect. And so what he does in his class, I think, is so cool. So we started off and we said, okay, Ron, what's the gift that you want to give to your students? Like, what is the gift that you want them to leave their class with? And he said, well, I want them to leave with something that will allow them to break into the industry. I want them to leave with a calling card that will actually give them a shot at publication. And something that if they're not fortunate enough to find a publisher who's willing to do it, something that they could actually publish themselves, and use as a prover. Like, this is what I do. And so what everyone in the class is doing is building a 6-page story. And the idea is that that 6-page stories are how most comic book writers break into the industry. There's actually a demand for them. It's pretty much impossible to get a full comic book made if you are not a known commodity, but you can get a 6-page story made. And it's also small enough that if you're willing to make the investment yourself, you can find a great artist and you could actually produce it yourself. And so the class begins with, like, what is a comic book? How do you find an idea? How do you connect to your ideas? How do you hone your ideas? How do you think visually? How do you externalize the internal emotions of your character? And then it culminates with a script for a 6-page story that they can use as their calling card if they're serious about getting into the industry.
So I know on your Twitter feed, you kind of given a few suggestions for comic books to check out. One being Black, and I talked to one of the creators at New York Comic Con last year. Are you going to try to find more writers to come in and teach?
Absolutely. This is, for us, this is the beginning of what we'd like to become a department. And our overall vision is that eventually we want to bring emerging comic book artists in as well. And the idea is that over time, those artists would be paired with emerging comic book writers. And so you'd actually give a new comic book writer the full experience of working with an artist to create something. You give the artist the experience of working with a comic book writer to create something, and then you'd even have the editorial experience, because comics are not created in a vacuum. They're created with editors, and so you would have the guidance of somebody like Ron as your mentor, who would be kind of guiding the process from like an editorial point of view for both the artist and the comic book writer. So we're at the very beginning of this, but part of the reason that we're called Jacob Krueger Studio is that we are really trying to build a studio model for emerging writers, where instead of I spent a lot of my career knocking on doors, going, hey, will you read me? Hey, will you read me? Hey, will you read me? Hey, this is a beautiful script. Will you make it? Will you make it? Will you make it? Will you make it? And for any artist, that's the part of the work that wears on you. That's the part of the work that's not fun. Being on the page with your characters is usually fun. And pitching can even be fun. But having something beautiful and struggling to get people's attention, and having to wade your way through other people's fears to get something that is beautiful created, that's tough. And so one of the big things that we're trying to do is to put our students into a position where they can produce their own work, where they can they have what they need to actually start with an idea and end with a comic, start with an idea, end with a short film. And so, that's challenging because it's expensive, and we don't want to just turn into another Hollywood where you have to be in. We believe in a non-curated model. We believe in a model where you don't have to jump any hurdle to get in. You just have to be willing to do the work, and to create something beautiful. And so, it's one of the things we're working on is the financing of that, and how do we make it accessible for the largest number of writers that we possibly can.
So, given your background in screenwriting, and I definitely will be listening to that podcast. What is the kind of the interaction between comic books and the screenwriting? Because a lot of right now, one of the big things is comic books being adapted to not only movies, but to streaming properties.
Absolutely. And this is interesting. This actually happened before it happened in comics. It actually happened in novels, where you saw the form of novels change, because what happened was you had a very robust novel industry, and it shrunk. And so novelists, and more importantly, publishers, started to realize, hey, we can't actually make money on novels, but we can make money selling their subsidiary rights so that they can become movies, TV shows. And so what ended up happening was you saw a lot of even really great writers. Like if you look at Cormac McCarthy's work, right? He started off and he was writing these powerful, lyrical, dense pieces like All the Pretty Horses, for example, which that has been optioned forever, and they're still trying to figure out how to make it right. Or Blood Meridian, same thing, right? Incredibly dense, complicated piece that didn't lend itself to adaptation. And if you look at his writing, you can see a shift where he writes No Country for Old Men, right? And the form of his writing changes. And he actually writes a piece that is screaming, adapt me, adapt me, adapt me, right? and you can kind of see that happening in the novel industry wildly now, where the novels that are getting published are the ones that scream, adapt me.
Mhm.
And I think the same thing is true in the comic book industry, right? Now comics has a loyal fan base, so it's a little bit different, right? So there are properties like Superman, like Conan, right?
Mhm.
There are properties that honestly, it doesn't matter what you do, right? That people are going to want to read that and see what the next iteration is, because they have a built-in fan base. Um, and that's true in movies too, right? As long as the Avengers feels like the Avengers, people are going to see
Mhm.
every Avengers movie, right? Um, as long as you create the feeling, right, and the characters feel like the characters that we believe in and that we love, there's a loyal following. And so those films and those comic books, they don't have the same limitations as a new writer coming in with a brand new idea that doesn't have a following yet.
Mhm.
Um, and if you don't have a following yet, or if you're a smaller franchise, if you're a franchise that maybe has a small following, a publisher is going to be scared, right? And
Right.
their fear is, well, it's going to cost me a lot of money. I have to hire an artist. I have to spend a lot of time developing this book with them, and then I'm going to get to the end, and are people going to buy it? And same thing is true of graphic novel, even more, right? I've got to create so many panels, and if
Mhm.
people don't buy it, I'm not going to make money. And so there's a big effect of that, of publishers saying, can I sell it to Hollywood? Can I sell it
Mhm.
to Netflix? Can I sell it to Amazon? Can it become a series? Can it become a show? And that changes the thinking about how these things are created. Um, and for that reason, I think if you're a comics writer, it makes sense to understand what's happening in screenwriting and TV, and to understand that these forms are speaking to each other now. And then what's interesting is on the screen and TV side, it's actually the opposite is happening, which is a lot of people are actually creating comics to create IP
Mhm.
so that they can sell a script that they've already written that's
Right.
not right. And so there's the part of me that is an artist at heart and a rebel at heart, that part of me goes like, just make what you want to make. But the part of me that's pragmatic, and that wants to see my students get their work out there, says, hey, if you're a screenwriter and you're not reading comics, if you're a screenwriter and you're not looking at what's happening in an industry, you're crazy. And similarly, if you are a comics writer and you're not looking at what's happening in film, and not looking at what's happening on TV and streaming, then you're crazy. Not just because there's a commercial value in understanding how adaptable your piece is, but also, we're artists, and we want to be consuming as much art as we possibly can. We want to be looking at as much as we possibly can. We want to be seeing what's going on in the world right now, and we want to be influenced by it. So it's not just comics. You want to be looking at what's happening in painting, what's happening in the visual arts, what's happening
Mhm.
in music. You want to be connected to the artists around you, because those are the people that are going to inspire you and change you.
Okay. So was there anything else that, maybe I didn't cover that you may, want to mention that, that about your program, or about, how people can, find out more about you?
Absolutely. Well, if you're a writer of any genre, then I would invite you to come check us out for free. You can go to writeyourscreenplay.com/quarantinis. or you can go to writeyourscreenplay.com and just search in our menus and find our
Mhm.
news events. They're every Thursday night at 7 p.m. Eastern time. It's only an hour, so it's really easy. And even if you've never written anything before, it's a really, if you're curious about the writing process, or if you've always wondered, like, well, could I write something? It's a really wonderful, safe community. Hundreds of people show up every week, and it's really lovely. And you get to learn from some of the greatest writers in the business for free. So I would say, if there's any part of you that wants to be a writer, then check out those Quarantinis events. You should also check out my podcast. That's also free, and you can find that at writeyourscreenplay.com/podcast. We have obviously that interview with Ron, but we look at all different kinds of movies and TV shows. And probably since we now have Ron, we're going to start looking at some comics. And what we do is, instead of breaking them down like 2 thumbs up, 2 thumbs down, which I think is quite frankly easy and not particularly valuable, because no two people ever agree on what's good. What we do is we look at them and say, okay, how are they built? Like, what can you learn from them as an artist? What are the elements, and how are they put together? What if there are elements that are not working? What's making that not work? And so we kind of break down things in a really fun, interesting way. So I'd encourage anybody who's curious about that, just to check out those 2 free resources. And then if you're interested in the comics writing class with Ron, or if you're interested in any of our classes, you can contact our admissions director, James Couts, who's a wonderful guy and a writer as well. And he actually came up through our program. So you can reach out to James at writeyourscreenplay.com, or you can just chat us at writeyourscreenplay.com. And he will talk to you about what you're working on or what your vision is. And even if you're just brand new starting out, like, okay, well, what do you want to create? And then he'll help advise you about which class is going to be best. If it's the comics class with Ron, that class is incredible. And we're going to be running it, almost once a month. So there are going to be lots of opportunities for people to take it.
So are they going to be different classes, or just the same same one?
So basically, the way that we work at the school is we don't do lots of elective classes. Because I feel like what you end up with a diffuse form of learning, right? Where some people know how to do this and other people know how to do this, and right. And what we're actually looking for is, we're looking for first laying the foundation. And that's why our classes are so inexpensive. And you'll see in some of these classes that you'll have a professional screenwriter right next to someone who's literally never written anything before. And what we're doing is, we're basically saying, hey, we're going to start over from zero, and we're going to look at, like, what are the core fundamental things that you need to know to build something in a way that's organic, that's not just following somebody else's formula or derivative, but that is actually growing organically from you and is going to showcase your voice. And so we begin there. And what we're really teaching in these 4-week classes is, we're teaching the foundations of structure. We're teaching somebody, whether it's a comic book, a TV show, or a feature, or a novel, or a play, we're teaching people how to build structure in their scripts. And then we're also teaching people how to build structure in their lives as artists, so that they can actually achieve their goals as artists. And so once we've laid that foundation, then our writers tend to go to one of 2 directions. The writers who like working in a group, rather than getting a kind of diffuse, elective approach, what we do is, we'll put them in a group called a workshop, where we'll take 8 writers who we think are going to be challenging to each other, who, they won't all be the same. Somebody might be working on, a total escapist comic, and somebody else might be working on something like really dark and deep and complicated and inner. And we'll put those 2 people in a room together, because we know they'll push each other in an interesting way. And so what we do is, we'll build this group of 8, and that group of 8 might stay together for 4, 5, 6, 7 years, even as they emerge into their professional career. So what's happening is, the teaching is happening at the level that the group is now, but we're moving each group towards the professional level, so that rather than kind of students who are learning and don't even know what electives they need, we're allowing our students to kind of grow together, and the mentor is figuring out where they want to go. And then for students who prefer to meet one-on-one, we do the exact same thing, but they meet one-on-one with a mentor either every week or every other week. So in comics, it would be Ron. You'd be meeting every week or every other week and working through your script, or your graphic novel or your comic, with his feedback. And again, we price it in a way to say that it's a fraction of the cost of grad school doesn't even describe it. It's ridiculously affordable. And we're pretty good with scholarships for people who can't afford our regular prices. And we basically, just to give you an example, Steve Moulton is is a Pulitzer nominee. He teaches at Columbia University Film School, where people spend $60,000 a year to study with him in a group. At our school, he's $450 a session. And so the difference in price is ridiculous, and you're getting him one-on-one as opposed to getting him in a group. And if you want to study with him in a group, the exact same class he teaches at Columbia for $60,000, you can have with us for $450 a month. So it's, and honestly, Ron's class is even less expensive than that. Ron's workshop is $350 a month. Ron's 4-week class is $375. So we make it extremely affordable for people, because that's our mission, is to empower artists. We're a business as well, but we don't run on the college model where we're supporting these huge buildings and lawns and housing and all that stuff. Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk. And then, you ever have any, thing that, down the road, involving, comics and comic writing that you'd like to, kind of promote or talk about, then be glad to have you back.
Absolutely. I would love to do that. Thank you. My very first comics interview. I've given probably 500 interviews on features and television, but I've never spoken about comics before. So thank you for reaching out and making this my first opportunity to do that.
Yeah. Well, again, I just kind of caught, I think you must have tagged Ron on his Twitter feed, and that's how I kind of, it kind of came to my attention out of the blue. I said, why not? I'll see if they're willing to talk. So.
I'm so glad you reached out. And if you ever want to come check out a class, let me know, and it would be my pleasure.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay. Take care, Chad.
All right. Take care and stay safe.